Welcome to another edition of Economic Forum, where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. My name is John Masuo. Today, we are going to be discussing issues that affect our move towards achieving an upper middle class economy in Zimbabwe by the year 2030. We are going to look at the strengths and weaknesses that we have as we go that route. In fact, the new dispensation aims to rebuild and transform Zimbabwe to that level of a higher income or an upper income economy by the year 2030. And in that context, we've invited Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who is a development strategist, who is going to be unpacking this very interesting topic to see whether we are on target. Professor, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Masugu.
Are we on target?
Oh, let me put it this way. Over the last 3 or so years of the new dispensation, I think half the battle has been won in the area of fiscal policy. Because you can see now that the foundation of the economy, which had been badly eroded, is now back. That part, even the international community, the World Banks, IMFs, African Development Banks, they have acknowledged that now we have fiscal discipline. It's now possible to actually plan for major development. It's also possible to rein in sufficient tax revenue, plan it, and put in, like we are seeing here and there, we're beginning to see infrastructure projects coming in pretty well, roads. There's focus on electricity, water, and so on, but I'll pick on that later. So the fiscal policy element is now back on track. The other half where we are still struggling is with the monetary policy. Our currency is still wobbly, so that is going to hold back development until it's sorted out. It's not actually that difficult to sort it out, but as always, things are not easy. Sorting out the currency in Zimbabwe after almost 2 decades of erosion is not easy. It's a bit like washing a piece of dirty linen. You know, if you put too much soap and rinse it too hard too quickly, so you wash it. The auction system, for instance, had gone a long way into actually reining in the parallel market and having a more kind of stable currency. But I think that the auction system is simply a tool to actually rein in the two markets, the official exchange rate and the parallel market rate. So it cannot be used ad infinitum. The number of principles that have to be adhered to, it doesn't matter what system you use. You could use the Dutch auction system or other systems. At the end of the day, the principles need to be adhered to a bit more strictly. And the principles basically are the auction system can only be measured in its success by the extent to which the parallel market is receding. So if the official exchange rate today is, say, 85, and the parallel market is at 120, for instance, when we have the next auction, if the parallel market rate is now up to 140, then the auction system should perform in a manner that reflects its ability to attract back the parallel market. As long as the auction system makes it possible to see the parallel market stay where it is and start receding back, then you're winning. And ultimately, you're slowly filling in the gap to a point where it is now possible to go back into the normal market system where you open your bureau de chances, the banks can also start actually buying and selling forex.
So, Prof, you've mentioned two factors here as we are trying to be on target: the fiscal, which you are happy with, and then the monetary, which you say is a little bit dicey, still struggling.
Yes.
What are the factors? What are the factors that we should look at?
I would say that either the auction system is regulated to ensure that it reins in the parallel market.
So those two that you mentioned are key.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you can police and so on and regulate. That's always necessary.
Yes.
But that only eventually succeeds when the bidding process actually acknowledges that there's a parallel market which has to be reined in. So if the bidding process does not rein in the parallel market rate, you are not really achieving what you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. You can run the auction system forever, you still won't win. So the other alternative would be some way of, instead of the importers bidding for forex, maybe let the banks bid for the forex, and the banks buy the forex with their own money, and then they can sell to the importers. Mm-hmm. Then it will be easier for the Reserve Bank to regulate the banks, because then you're not running an auction system for importers. You're running an auction system for banks,
yes.
so that they should buy with their own money, though.
Yes.
Because that way it will be a more serious competition, and if they're going to sell the forex to importers at reasonable rates, they have to play by the market forces.
Just before we conclude this segment,
Yeah.
what would you give as an overview of our economy at the moment, in summary?
In summary, if we can sort out the currency, we have got a strong base to move on. Yeah, because the currency is like blood in your body.
It affects everything.
Well, that is what takes value and everything to the whole body.
Yes.
So if your currency is not flowing properly in the system, it doesn't reach other parts of the body, or it's too much here and not there, then other parts of the body are going to be paralyzed.
And this message about correcting it, are you only directing it to the authorities or even to the ordinary people?
This is for everyone.
Yes.
As I say, I think honest efforts have gone into sorting out the fiscal policy. There's some discipline. We just need the same discipline on the currency and the monetary system.
Yeah. I'll stop you there. We'll continue with that very interesting analysis that you are giving us. That's Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, a development strategist who is sharing with us on our road towards 2030, where our national strategic plan is saying we should reach an upper middle class economy. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. Welcome to the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing the road towards 2030, where the national government has said would want to reach the upper middle class economy. Professor, let's look at some other best practices that have been carried out in other parts of the world. Are we emulating anyone, or we're just looking at our situation and coming up with our own model? Are we going to emulate Europe, the tigers, the Asian tigers, or any other? Or you are saying, let's grow it at home, as you always say, we are African?
Yeah. Okay, we have our own peculiarities as African economies, and specifically as Zimbabwe, that we have to take into consideration. But by and large, when the president and his leadership team talk about an upper middle income economy by 2030, as a strategist, I would assume they are also saying we're not just trying to reach upper middle income status by 2030, but we'll proceed
even beyond
to high income economy and be the first country on the continent
maybe
to be an industrialized high income country. There's not one industrialized high income country on the continent. None of the 55 countries are. So it's not just Zimbabwe. None, not one. Not even our biggest economies.
In fact, I was going to intervene there because
yeah.
when other people look at South Africa, when they look at Rwanda, they feel that they are already there and they are miles ahead. Now, if you can just clarify that, because those are the perceptions, Prof.
Yeah, Rwanda is doing very well. It is very much a service economy. It is hardly going to be an industrialized economy. So they're doing really well, but on target for industrialized high-income country will take a lot more. South Africa has already hit the limit. They have been on the way down. They are in a deep middle-income trap. Like every other African, they're not the only one. Every African country is either in a low-income or middle-income trap, meaning your domestic market is too narrow, your industrial sector doesn't grow. So what happens is the unemployment rate always continues to go up, and poverty increases. So even South Africa is in a deep middle-income trap. They are not going anyplace. They're not going to be an industrialized high-income country soon. So like many other countries, they will probably recede to middle income, and then if they're not careful, even low income, before they start rising again. Many countries in Africa have gone through that route. In our case, we're middle income before. So now we're starting again. And I would say that there are things we should definitely emulate the Asian tigers. None of the African countries is emulating the Asian tigers sufficiently. We are just borrowing bits and pieces.
Let's
but
name
we
them.
borrow
Which ones?
All the way from Japan was the first one.
Yes.
Japan was the first Asian country to be a high-income industrialized country.
Okay.
Before that, it was only European countries or countries which were colonized by Europeans, and they took them over completely, like Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand. Japan became the first non-European economy to be an industrialized high-income country. South Korea, and so on and so forth. And today, China is on its way. And there are a number of principles that we can borrow and then apply to African circumstances. So we don't borrow blindly, we have to borrow intelligently, either whether we're borrowing from the West or the East. So the most important element from Asia is that you build your domestic market as fast as you can. Okay. So to build a domestic market for your own manufactured goods, you need to grow a rural middle class very quickly. These are people who earn $4 a day plus, 5 to 10, even up to 20. If that class of people grows very fast by linking small farmers and small entrepreneurs in the rural areas to industrial processes, so that they're not just producing, whether it's maize, soybean, groundnut, it doesn't matter what they're producing. They have to be part and parcel of a well-planned industrial strategy, which says their products are going to be aggregated, they're going to be manufactured, starting with local manufacturing, all the way up to urban manufacturing.
We're not doing that at the moment.
We're not doing that at the moment because we're just coming out of poverty to a level where we worry more about food security. So it's good to worry about food security because that's primary. So I'm not saying we don't. But then when we reach that 2 million tons of maize, we are sigh of relief.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we should actually be aiming at 10 million tons. But then the non-strategists will say, but we only need 2 million to feed ourselves and to have animal feed. What I'm saying is, don't forget that there's 10, 12, 15 more products you can manufacture from maize that we're importing right now. We're importing 2, 3 types of starches for pharmaceuticals, for stationery, for confectionery. We're importing different types of oils, all produced from maize. But we only think of rural meat and animal feed.
Yes.
So if our industrial strategy takes each and every raw material and sees line of sight of all the industrial products that can be made from that, then we can produce as much as we want. It will be in the industrial process.
Professor Rukuni, a very interesting discussion.
Yeah.
You're bringing out very interesting points to note as best practice for Zimbabweans. That's Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who is a development strategist, our guest today on Economic Forum, where we are discussing the road to 2030. And we are only 9 years away, and Professor is trying to tell us how we can cover these 9 years. It's a very short period of time, but let's hear what he says in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. Welcome to the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we've invited Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who is a development strategist, who is showing us some of his points or some of his suggestions towards 2030, where we look forward to reach an upper middle class economy. Professor, you had started talking about reindustrialization, particularly from some of the products or from some of our produce from agriculture and so forth. Let's talk reindustrialization as we move towards 2030.
So reindustrialization requires an approach which takes the entire economy, the entire government. It's a pity that our government is in silos because we followed the European system of government. For developing countries, that is terrible because there's so much loss of synergy. To industrialize, reindustrialize Zimbabwe, we cannot follow the old model which was left by the colonial settlers. It only produces a dual economy. We now need to plan this thing in three parts. What you might call your basic raw material production and local processing in villages and townships and small towns. Okay. And then the second part is light industries, which are genuinely light industries, which also operate in our small towns, growth points, and villages. Okay. If you notice, difference between Africa and Asia is small towns, villages, townships, they all manufacture something. In Africa, our small towns don't manufacture anything. They're just dormitories, commercial centers, administrative centers. So Zimbabwe, the real manufacturing centers are still Harare and a little bit of Bulawayo. Mm-hmm. Well, every little town must start manufacturing before we even get to 2030. Mm-hmm. Whether Marwendera, Chinoi, Masvingo, they should be bustling with light industrial processes. In other words, everything that comes from local raw material production starts being processed right there, 20, 30 kilometers from where stuff is produced. Food should not be transported 200 kilometers to Harare.
And transport becomes very expensive.
You transport maize 200 kilometers, you grind it in Harare, pack it, transport it another. By the time you eat your food, your sadza, it has traveled 500 kilometers. Yeah. It is not good food. You should eat sadza that has only traveled 10 to 20 kilometers maximum. But seriously, light industry, when it bustles in all the small towns and villages, is what creates demand for heavy industry. So don't forget, raw material production and the creation of a rural middle class is what creates the demand for light industry. Because once they have $10, $20 a day in the pocket, they can now start consuming locally manufactured goods. Because your food now is not going to be processed in Harare. It's now going to be processed locally.
Now let's move to the informal sector. Shall we continue to call it informal now that almost everyone is doing their own thing?
Well, we are following the Western colonial understanding of how an economy grows. Yes. Okay. Because don't forget, the Europeans were the only ones, starting with the UK, where as the economy was growing from predominantly agrarian agriculture to industrialization, it remained one economy. Okay, that's why they never understood why, when they came here and had a dual economy, because they only produced enough on a few 4,000 farms producing for the whole industry, and then the oil industry targeting a small domestic middle class. But now, what we need is the exact opposite. There's no such thing as informal in Africa. It's indigenous commerce. The Asian tigers refused to call the CSO people informal. They say it's proto-industrialization. meaning manufacturing without a factory. Okay. Now, the fact that you manufacture without a factory does not make you informal. It makes you a certain stage in the industrial process. So our cabinet should take the so-called informal sector, the so-called SMEs. No, it's proto-industry. They should take it as a primary form of early industrialization so that our policies can actually support the kind of CSO activity in every little town, village, growth point. People will manufacture dovi, peanut butter, hufu, maize. All the things that you buy in your big supermarkets today should be bought locally from local proto-industrialization is what then creates demand from light industry.
Yes.
And then you get to heavy industry.
Professor Rukuni, just to wind up our discussion, 1993, 1994, you were the chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry into Land Tenure. Let's talk about the value of land in all this discussion. We have our land as Zimbabwe. So all is done. The deal is done. With our land, what fails us to be an upper middle class economy?
Land is always going to be important to an African person. If you don't understand land, you're not an African. It's the foundation for everything. Your identity, your economic base, your security. So land, the land reform program was a necessary thing to have. Now the structure of the agrarian economy has changed, making it possible now to create a serious rural middle class. If we follow certain principles, some of which I was trying to follow through. But the long and the short of it is, I was not so long ago, I was talking to the Minister of Lands Agriculture. And I was very impressed by some of his ideas. For a start, for instance, now that we have almost 60% of the land available to small farmers, how does it? So he spoke about, let's take Mvudza. What was I saying? How do we move from Mvudza from just being a food security idea so that people feed themselves into a serious industrial process? And he was talking about that, and I would see him sharing ideas about how to, for instance, mechanize the Mvudza process. So instead of it being labor intensive, there are some machines which can do it. You're already beginning to industrialize the process.
Professor, I want to stop you there. We have a lot to talk about, especially when we flash back to 1993, 1994, when you chaired this land commission and the land being so valuable to us as Zimbabweans. But I would like to thank you for coming on to Economic Forum today. But one last question, and that demands a very short answer. Are we getting there? Are we going to manage 2030?
Yes, so it's a moving target.
In a few seconds.
Yes, we can get there because the foundation has been laid, the fiscal. We should sort out the currency and then redo our industrial strategy. We will definitely get there.
Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who has been our guest tonight on Economic Forum, I would like to thank you very much for coming onto the program.
Thank you, sir.
So until next time, please don't forget to get in touch with us. You can do so by contacting us on the numbers that are showing on your screen. So until next time, here on Economic Forum, this is John Masuku.